energy is the most valuable currency that you can have. And I was like, wait a minute, I'm broke at the moment, but I have a lot of energy. And I feel like, hold on, I could bring some really good energy. I always felt like I was that person. And funny enough, when I was, probably partying too much in my late 20s, I was the guy that was like, when Brett was there, I was going to change your night. We were going to have a great night. And I remember when I was started to give all that up and I stopped drinking and I made like a lot of big changes like that. I remember like having this identity crisis of like, wait a minute, but like, I'm that fun guy. Like, what am I going to do? And all of a sudden I was like, well, what if I was still that guy, but instead of changing somebody's night, I could help impact somebody's life. And that was like, ooh, okay, perspective shift. Let's go get this.
Thank you for tuning in to the Mile 40 podcast. I am Bishoy Tadros, the author of Break Barriers and Audacious, both of which are sold on Amazon. And I invite you to join me as I engage with guests to discuss those bounce back moments that we encounter on our personal journey. Mile 40 is a forum to learn about how athletes, professionals, and leaders of all backgrounds stare down moments in life where the only option is to rise up. The Mile 40 podcast strives to remind listeners that the comeback is always greater than the setback. Welcome back to another episode of the Mile 40 podcast. Thank you all for continuing to tune in. I very much appreciate it. I hope everybody is doing incredibly well. If you haven't already, please be sure to hit subscribe. If you're listening on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, wherever you get your podcast from, check out the show notes, pick up a copy of Break Barriers or Audacious, use the discount code. I will mail it out, sign it myself. Also, give the show 5 stars. It really helps us grow, and I really appreciate it. Today's guest is a guest I am very excited to have on. I have Brett Eaton. He's emerged as a compelling speaker on confidence, sharing his expertise on overcoming fear and self-doubt. As the co-host of Win Where It Matters retreats, he focuses on the essential aspects of life: health, wealth, relationships, and fulfillment, to guide individuals toward peak performance. His journey began in the fitness industry, evolving from helping entrepreneurs to advising top performers across various sectors worldwide. His upcoming book, Uncomfortable Either Way: Why Choosing Easy is Making Your Life Hard, reflects his philosophy that embracing challenge is crucial to personal development. Brett, thank you for joining me.
Bishoy, thanks so much for having me, man. I'm excited for today.
You got it, man. Oh, man, just the title of your book gets me jacked up because it is such a relevant title, not just to this show, but to I can't even tell you how many tens of stories have been on this show where the message comes out, just do the hard things.
Yeah.
So,
It's been a message in my life, and it's kind of strung throughout many different chapters and journeys and ups and downs. And it just always comes back to that. And all the good things in my life right now, it's because I took the risk of, hey, it's going to be uncomfortable. But a lot of those moments, you have this fork in the road, and people don't take the opportunities that pass them by because they don't realize that they're already uncomfortable. They're looking at this change is going to be difficult, or it's going to cause me to have to give up XYZ or turn into a different person or shed an identity. But we realize, when we come to peace with, I'm already uncomfortable, we realize that we're going to be uncomfortable either way. And one of them comes with usually massive rewards, and the other one comes with a life of regret.
I'm going to dive right into it. When did you explore the power of exiting your comfort zone? Was there an experience?
There's been a few. And it's funny how you can look back in hindsight at some of these massive moments in your life. And a lot of times when you're living them, sometimes you do, sometimes you're in the moment. You're like, I'm in one right now. I know there's going to be something on the other side of this. I don't know. But other times we look back and in the moment, all we feel is the pain, the discomfort, that I just want to get out of this, please help me. And then we look back and we're like, man, if it wasn't for that moment, XYZ. And I know you talk about, people's stories. It's funny. People often ask me, like, where did I become a motivational speaker? Or like, when did I know I wanted to do that? And I didn't know it at the time, but I had some really bad back injuries in high school that caused me to miss a year of sports completely. And I was a 3-sport athlete. Like, I lived, breathed, everything was sports. And they couldn't figure out what was going on with my back. And it was either surgery or sit for a year and see if, this back thing could heal itself or you can grow out of it. And it was at that time that I think back and I was like, that was the first time I remember having to be really motivational because I couldn't catch a pass. I couldn't shoot a 3-pointer. I couldn't, hit a home run. I couldn't do anything like that for the team. But what I said was, how can I be the most motivating teammate anybody's ever experienced? And I think back to that, and it's like, okay, that's where I got that skill. That skill where that's where that skill was born.
When you kind of take the mentality of, all right, like I can't do what I love to do. So now I need to figure out how I'm going to contribute from a motivational, element. That comes from somewhere, right? Because there are a lot of people who would take the cards that they've been dealt there and either kind of roll into a ball of depression or kind of go the other route. So talk to me a little bit about some of the influences that maybe kind of played a role in helping you get there.
Yeah, so I was 16 when that happened, and don't get me wrong, there
Yeah.
was a lot of
Sure.
ball of depression. I don't wanna act like, "Oh, man, I was so smart." No, 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 I wanted to curl up in a ball and cry and be mad at the world. And I just remember that time being starting to go down that road. And if it wasn't for, an incredibly strong-willed mother and some really great coaches in my life at the time, kind of pulled me back and were like, "Hey, man, like you're still part of this team." And it was I almost needed that reassurance of like I can't do anything, so like I'm not even part of the team. Why do I even just show up to practice? Like I don't need to do anything. And they kind of pulled me and said, "Hey, you're a vital part of this team, whether you are on the field or not." And all of a sudden, I was like, "Yeah, okay, maybe I can be." So I just started doing all the things that I remember being able to do. And in that moment, you realize that if you do things for other people, a lot of time when you make it not about yourself, I was so consumed in all the anger, the hurt that was all wrapped up in me. But when you start to realize, like maybe I could do some things for some other people, it gets us out of our own way. It gets us out of our own head of maybe it's not just about me and maybe life is bigger than me. And a couple other moments in my life, you start going down that road of like, yeah, it's usually because we're stuck in our own little glass bubble of it's all about me. All my problems are so big, this. And then you get out in the world and you're like, wait a minute. Perspective is a crazy helpful tool.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's let the audience familiarize themselves a little bit with you. Like, where did you grow up?
Yeah.
You mentioned obviously three sport athlete. Is there anything that we need to know about your childhood that was a little bit different?
Yeah, so I grew up in Bergen County, New Jersey. Born and raised was to a normal family. We were middle class. Had a dad, a mom, and a sister. And the part of that 16-year-old story of being mad at the world because of this injury that I didn't share was that I lost my dad to a heart attack overnight. Fairly healthy. All of a sudden, we had a great dinner. Went off to a friend's house. Got a phone call. Rushed to the hospital. That was the last time I saw him. And so that all of a sudden rocked my world. It was like this beautiful, safe place that I live. It was like all of a sudden, it was like, hold on a second, why, things like this can happen, and you read about them on the news, but like they could happen to me. Like, hold on a second. So there was definitely some anger and some changes here, and then all of a sudden, seeing my mom work two jobs and all of a sudden, never cared about money growing up. My family never made life for the fun have to do with money. And all of a sudden it's like, wait a minute, this money thing kind of sucks. Like it controls a lot of happiness and it's stress and all that stuff. So that's the first like major moment of my life where I knew there had to be some adversity, kind of overcoming adversity. And then went off to college in Virginia. Spent about a decade in the fitness industry doing all things fitness, personal training, running gyms, opening gyms, all that kind of stuff. And then really changed over to high performance coaching and speaking and been doing that for another nine or so years here, running my own business through that.
How old were you when your dad passed?
I was 16. So all happened. I was a sophomore in high school. My sister was off at college. And all of a sudden, overnight, it's just me and mom. I became the man of the house. So, there's a little bit of like forced growing up that I was a little resentful for. So life changed really quickly for me. And again, I'm really grateful for a lot of the people in my life that kind of kept me going down the right road. But then I went off to college and all of a sudden, there were no rules again and I could be a kid. And I probably went further into that, party lifestyle that I needed to. And that lasted a lot longer. But then, late 20s, early 30s, I started to be like, hold on a second, this isn't the life I want. Let's make some better choices.
When I when I look at you again, from the outside, there's definitely something different about you in a positive way. And one of the things that I'm going to try to tackle out of this episode and in this conversation is trying to figure out what bred that. So now we learned a little bit about your experience with your father. Talk to me about what part of your father still lives within you. when you look back on what he taught you in those 16 years and how you experienced his death?
You're good at this because that's a really great question. So when I think of my dad, I always think of the things that I could see and that everybody else could see. And my dad had this ability to just light up a room. He would walk in. He was a bigger guy. Would had a laugh that like everybody would turn and be like, "Who's laughing? Because that's hysterical. I'm laughing now because that guy's laughing." And he just had this like great energy, and everybody wanted to be around him. And all his name was Bill, and like Uncle Billy, like all of my cousins were like, "Oh, Uncle Billy's like he's going to be fun. He'll be the one out playing with us or on the ground or in the dirt or whatever it was." So a lot of that, I believe I have, and I don't know if it's because I want it or because it came naturally to me. But there's a lot of lessons that I learned from him of you will either change the energy of a room by walking in or by walking out. And I've always viewed energy as currency, and I believe like the person who has the best energy holds a lot of cards and has will create a lot of opportunities for themselves. And when I was going through like my own money mindset journey and all that, which everybody's still going through all of those things, I remember reading once like, hey, money, I'm sorry, energy is the most valuable currency that you can have. And I was like, wait a minute, like I'm broke at the moment, but I have a lot of energy, and I feel like, hold on, I could bring some really good energy. I always felt like I was that person. And funny enough, when I was, probably partying too much in my late 20s, I was the guy that was like, when Brett was there, you were like, I was going to change your night. We were going to have a great night. And I remember when I was started to give all that up and I stopped drinking and I made like a lot of big changes like that. I remember like having this identity crisis of like, wait a minute, but like, I'm that fun guy. Like, what am I going to do? And all of a sudden I was like, well, what if I was still that guy, but instead of changing somebody's night, I could help impact somebody's life? And that was like, whoo, okay, perspective shift. Let's go get this.
I love that you went there because you went exactly where I was going. I was that guy, when I was younger, college, in my 20s, and then I had to make that shift as well. And it for me, while it felt natural, there's still some difficulty to it, right? Because you're still like trying to figure out who you really are because you really kind of planted yourself as being that guy who everybody liked to be around in that environment. Did you have, any difficulty making that change? And speak to that a little bit.
Oh, big time. I think anytime you change a piece of your identity or you give something up that you've done for a long time, there is this, let's use the word uncomfortable because we've talked about it already. Like, it's going to be uncomfortable because all of a sudden now everybody's going out and you're not. Like, wait a minute. Everybody's saying, but Brett, just come on, have one with us, or let's go out, or, what are you doing? Why are you being a loser? Like, all those things, like, that's uncomfortable. But change becomes real easy when you realize that one uncomfortable is bigger than another. And what was so uncomfortable for me was starting to get to like approaching 30 and being like, man, this is not like where I thought I would be when I was 30. And this is also not what I thought I would be doing. I was kind of unhappy with my life. I was super mediocre. Like that word would just like pierce a hole in my chest. And I was like, man, I'm average. Like I'm very, very average. Now, a lot of people are happy with that. Average made me want to like crawl out of my own skin because I knew that there was more inside me. I knew that I was, could potentially do something great. And it was like, yeah, I'm going to do that. But like tomorrow, I'll do that tomorrow. So making those changes was super uncomfortable, but believe it or not, when I started making them, I felt more aligned than ever. And yeah, the more and more I'd kind of push back on the people trying to keep me where I was, the more confidence I would gain in the direction I was going. And couldn't tell them where I was going because I didn't really know, but I was like, I know I need to go in that direction. And the more I started to go down there, the more I started to kind of build confidence and stack habits and stack foundational beliefs and core values that I was like, hey, this is way more aligned with me. And like, while I still am not sure where I'm going, it feels way more aligned and I'm enjoying life a lot more.
At this point, do you still come across people who want you to be the person that they framed you as? Like, because I still come across people who, knew me as that person. And it's really hard to kind of explain to them. And not that I even try to explain at this point because I don't really care to explain, but it's really hard to get across the message of I'm a lot happier as this person. I
Yeah.
don't, like I'm not
Yeah.
I'm not going back. I'm
Yeah.
way happier as this guy. But I ask you this question more so the audience can kind of hear your thought process about it, right? Like because there are a lot of people who are curious as they see either themselves evolving or their friends evolving or the people in their circle evolving. And they're trying to understand, like, what is this person going through? Why are they doing the things that they're doing in terms of, changing and talking about growth and growth mindset and why are they doing these things that they never would have thought of doing before? And am I wrong for not, getting on board with them, or are they crazy? And so that's kind of what I want to dive into a little bit.
Yeah, you bring up a great point, and I use the analogy. To me, it's like the best way to explain it is kind of this bus, and I call it like the bus of life, right? And you're driving this bus of life, and you're going to make stops along the way. Like college was a stop, and then first job was, and you're stopping, and people getting on your bus, and everybody that's on your bus tries to have influence over you, right? Positively, negatively, whatever it may be. And every once in a while, you're going to get to a stop, and people are going to convince you that you got to get off and that you should get off and stay here. And a lot of people do. A lot of people put that bus in park and stay there for a very long time. But what you have to realize on that bus is two really important factors. Is one, not everybody is meant to be on that bus for the long haul, right? There are going to be people who get on for certain chapters of your life or seasons of your life and then get off. And the second thing, and it's more important than anything, is you cannot let anybody else sit in the driver's seat. You have to be in control and drive your own life. And that's where I think a lot of people get confused is like, well, we all do this. That's great. And there are plenty of times where you do put the bus in park. And, in my late 20s, there was probably in park for a long time. But then all of a sudden you're like, no, I know I'm called to go in that direction. I'm meant to go in that direction. And at some point you're going to have to drive away with people standing at the bus stop because they're just not coming. And I like to think of it more of as opposed to like a barrier or like, a blockade. I like to think of it as a bridge. Like there's this bridge and I'm walking over it and I'd love you guys to come, or I'd love you to come with me. Or, I think there's some good things over there, but you can't make everybody come. And a lot of people will never cross the bridge because their circle, they're afraid to give up what they have for what they want. And the people that do cross the bridge realize like, hey, only a very select few people will be on that bus for the long haul.
Talk to me a little bit about, the experience that you kind of went through as you were being more conscious about it, whether it was the fact that you started to realize you were either your circle was getting smaller or, your interests were changing or you were hanging out with a completely different group of people.
Yeah, it was kind of two parts. And I'm going to skip to the end and then go back for a quick second. And not the end, but what's funny about that time, and for anybody else making big changes in their life or diving into personal growth or giving up a really bad habit or whatever it is, what shocked me and what I like to kind of tell people now to encourage them is the same guys that were giving me the most shit for not drinking or for getting, like there was a couple years there was like famous for getting the Cobb salad. Like wherever we went, Brett was getting the Cobb salad and it was like, oh, another salad for Brett. Like, and jokes and jokes and jokes. And then like you brush it off and you're like, whatever. What I tell people is like the same people that are giving you the most, like that are ribbing you the most right now are going to be the same people in 3 to 5 years that are going to call you and say, hey man, like, would you mind helping me like get on track? Or like, hey man, what are you doing to stay so healthy when, my health is going down the drain? Or, hey, I really want to make some changes. And like, I've been watching you for a while. And like what you have to do, you never get to that point. You never get to be the positive influence if you don't have the confidence to get through the jokes, and you don't have the confidence to like be really in alignment of where you're going. So I say that first. Going back, it's almost like a addition by subtraction. And what I started to do was put myself in rooms and full of people and listening to people that were actually doing that. And I forced myself to go to some conferences that I had no business going to. And that's when I started listening to podcasts. And all of a sudden I was filling my brain with all of these other people that thought and spoke the way I did. So even though I didn't have a friend circle at that time that did a lot of this, all of a sudden I felt like I was surrounded. And that's the beautiful thing about social media, right? There's good and there's bad, there's ugly, but like the good part is that you can surround yourself with those people and you don't have to leave your own living room. So getting that type of thought process. And then all of a sudden I started speaking that way. And all of a sudden I started acting that way. And like, why are some people super driven and other people are not? Well, okay, the driven people know where they want to go. They have a destination in mind. It's like, okay, I want to be that person. So that's kind of what I would recommend for somebody of like, hey, how do we get through it? have some confidence on what you're doing and be really, really sure about the changes that you want to make. And then also how you use your language. If you were to say like, Brett, go do this thing, or let's go have a drink. And if I were like, I don't really know. I don't know if I'm going to do that tonight, or I sound very unsure, which means you as my friend are going to be like, I know what he needs. He needs me to convince him. Right. And I'm leaving the door open. And I started to realize the way I phrase things made a big difference. If I was like, oh, I'm not drinking right now, or I'm not going to drink tonight, or I'm not drinking at this moment, or, I'm not going to go to the movies tonight. I'm going to, I got to get up early tomorrow. If you say things with conviction, nobody messes with you. But if you say things with worded as a question, or you say things with
like I could be convinced.
I could be convinced, you're going to invite all of the critics and the people to come in and try to talk you out of it. So
I agree.
Really, with a lot of clients and stuff, we'll change the language, and I'm like, hey, you're not even sure that you want that. If you're not sure you want that, I'm going to talk you out of it. So you have to choose the words wisely, and people will hear it the same way.
I agree, but I do think that's part of the process, right? Like building that conviction up, right? Like I think that naturally because we used to be the guys who would do the convincing,
Yeah, exactly.
right? Like that was
Exactly.
us. So we know how that scenario plays out. And I think building that conviction on the other side of the spectrum, it takes some work. But I think that the good thing is that anyone listening to this, like it can be done. And like anything, like when we kicked off this episode, you know, it's a hard thing, but you have nothing to lose by exercising, that 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 practice of language. You think you have more to lose than you actually have to lose.
Absolutely. And the point of this is, like, we're talking about ourselves kind of in the past, like a younger version. There are, I mean, I work with clients, I go to speaking events. People will come up to me in their 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and are still trying to break out of some identity, or trying to break out of some circle, or the women's wines clubs, right? The book clubs where it's all about wine, and God forbid somebody stops drinking at that. It's like now they're outcast. So it's like it happens at all phases. So I don't want you to think that this is like just an early 20 thing. It will happen at all areas of your life. And sometimes, like, there's kids, and there's this, and there's this, and all of a sudden somebody wants to, stop going out to dinner as much, and hit the early morning workouts, or they want to make a change, or they want to start a business, and all of their friends are 9-to-5ers. It's like, you also have to break that barrier. So this comes at all different phases of life. So I just want to point that out to your listeners, that this isn't just a post-college thing.
Agreed. And I'm with you there too. I get the same stories, and that's been the beauty of the show, really, is the fact that we do see the fact that it doesn't matter where you are in life, right? We connected through Greg, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Greg's audience is middle age, right?
Yep. 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 Yep.
And you heard
The midlife male.
Yeah, exactly. So, there's definitely something to be said about that it's a journey that we all go on at different points, but there's a unifying factor there. Brett, I think about what you're doing now, and I think about how you got here, and I think about how you must have built a wonderful skill set when it comes to your relationships. We'll get as personal as you want to get, but you've got an incredible life partner who, based on, what you guys are building, I'm sure has played a big role in helping you to where you are today. Talk to us a little about how you guys met, and the dynamic there.
Yeah. So my wife, Ann, she was still is the founder of Solidcore. She sold that business a year ago, about a year after we had met. And again, like she had spent 10 years on that. She's an incredible entrepreneur, so good with the decisions that she's made. And she's also like incredibly inspiring. And we met actually after we had both come out of long-term relationships that ended. And what was funny was a lot of the reason why our relationship that ended was like this masculine feminine dynamic that was off in the relationship. And, successful entrepreneur, she has to be in her masculine, many times for work or for business, whatever it may be. And a lot of times, her partner in the past has shrunk a little bit because of that. And in my relationship, I was with somebody who was like very type A, wanted control of everything. So I was like, I don't care about that. You're take control of it. And again, the masculine feminine kind of got off. So when we met, we very quickly knew that, hey, this is probably going to be the thing for both of us, that will either be the reason this works or the reason that this gets thrown off. So we spent a lot of time early on of establishing kind of the masculine and feminine in our relationship. In business, we're both entrepreneurs. We both run our own business. We both have to, make a lot of decisions there. And then when we come to the relationship, we've tried to figure out how do we make this work. She sold her company last year. So, I mean, she's the primary breadwinner, and to be completely candid, like, it's not even close. Like, I'm successful. I love what I do. I think I do it really well, but like, that's, she did something that's very rare and incredible. And we also knew that we had to get on the same page with money. And I've spent my whole life in it, growing up in a traditional family where, like, I always thought I'd be, I've been making decisions for my wife and kids that didn't exist for a long time, thinking I was going to be, this provider. So it's changed a little bit to where I still like to feel like I'm providing. I still like to feel like I'm protecting, but it looks a little different than a traditional relationship where, the man goes to work, woman stays home. It's like, no, that's not going to be our relationship. But we found with putting a lot of work into it and a lot of deep conversations and doing therapy together and separately, it's like we figured out a way to get this to work. And I've learned so much from her. She's an incredible thinker. She makes decisions super quick. I tend to be a little bit like, let me think on it. Let me make sure the right decision. So I've just learned a lot from her. And I think, like, the confidence that I have in who I am started before her, but has just been emphasized even more because of the work that we've done together.
Hey, Mile 40 fam. I get asked a lot about my training programs and how I set myself up for success to cross finish lines all over the world. Well, I'm going to let you in on a secret. Recovery is half the battle. And in order to get that recovery, I rely on clean sources of protein. That's why my go-to protein shake is Owen. Only what you need. I have one after every single workout. 100% vegan and plant-based, Owen's plant-based shakes use a multi-source protein blend of pea, pumpkin seed, and flax seeds to include all essential amino acids to promote optimal daily health. Uncompromised taste. Owen brings together the essential elements of advanced nutrition, amazingly clean ingredients, functional superiority, and uncompromised taste. Now go ahead, go to www.liveowen.com. That's spelled LIVEOWYN.com. Use code MILE40 for 20% off your next purchase. Only what you need. To the listeners out there, because there's a lot of people, a lot of single listeners and a lot of people in relationships who, you got to think about the audience base here. If you're listening to this show, you definitely are either into the world of fitness or into the world of challenging yourself and doing hard things and putting yourself in uncomfortable situations. And I'm going to go out and take a leap, and I'm going to say that both you and Anne like to do hard things. And talk to me about how that dynamic works. Whether, you got two probably competitive people in a relationship.
Yeah.
And talk to me about that a little bit, because there's definitely something about that dynamic that I see where you guys could 100% lift each other up, and that's the beauty of it. But I also want to understand how it works when you have two people who are, always out there, with their heads as strong as ever.
Yeah, that is a really good question also, because we had to learn, and I had to learn really early on that, like, hey, there's times to be competitive, and there's times it's healthy, and there are times it is not healthy for the relationship. And that's where money was one of those things. Like, early on, I was like, hey man, I could build my business to a place where it's incredibly successful and be thriving and all these things. And I still may not be the breadwinner. So if I'm chasing that as a goal, I almost had to reestablish, well, what does success look like for me? Because I went down that path, and I was like, hey, I'm going to go do this thing, and I'm going to do, and then eventually I'm going to make, and I ended up with two scenarios. One, nobody knows, nobody has any idea, because, like, her stuff was already out there, and it's like, nobody cares, Brett. And then I do this thing and I chase it and I bury myself into the ground, and I, like, end up destroying our relationship and any of my peace of mind because I was chasing this thing that, like, doesn't matter. So that was the one area I knew, hey, like, being competitive in that area is not the way. We love both doing hard things. We did two things this past year. We did 29-0-29, which is the Everesting challenge, where you hike the equivalent of Mount Everest. We did that with Greg Scheinman. And then we also like when we met, she was like diving headfirst into beach volleyball. And actually one of our, very first dates was me convincing her that I knew how to play beach volleyball, and I did not. But luckily I'm athletic enough to like figure it out on the fly. And she was like, okay, he sucks, but I think there's potential here, so I'm going to stay with him. And now we play all the time. We both just played in one of our first tournaments actually this month. And that's an area where like we love competing with each other. And when we're on opposite sides of the net, we like compete like crazy. We both want to beat each other. But at the end, it's like a hug and a kiss and a great job. Like that was super fun. So it's finding out where the competition brings out the best in us and where competition brings out the worst in us. And some of that is trial and error. And some of that is, we're both speakers, and she's more well known right now. And I'm up and coming, but she's has the established credibility already. So like people will find her out of nowhere and be like, I don't even know who these people are, but they stumbled upon me and like, hey, come speak for this thing. And I'm like, damn, I would love to speak at that event. But I just understand like, hey, I got to earn the right. And I kind of take that as a challenge of the opportunities will come when I've earned them and when I continue to build my craft and I continue to be one of the best speakers on confidence that there is. So that's where
I love that.
figuring
I
out
love
what's right.
there's such a beauty in being able to like learn from each other and lift each other up at the same time. There is no, it's just it's it's how a relationship should work. With regards to it's not a like they always say you should complete, not compete,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And
Yes.
and that's
I
how
like
I
that.
envision this. And maybe I should have like started backwards as opposed to going straight to asking you about this. But what I really wanted to get to was now you're in this place where, things are good. What were you chasing before from a relationship perspective?
Really good question. Uh, I think I've always been chasing what we have now. But a lot of times I have, a lot of people will be like, relationships are hard. Relationships are hard. And I actually hate that line. I think relationships take effort and they take work, but it would almost be like if we constantly be like, oh man, this podcast is going to be so hard. This podcast, well, eventually I'm going to find ways that it's hard. I'm going to be focusing on the perspective of this is hard. Let me find all the ways where this is, or this, podcast is going to be intimidating. Let me figure out all the ways that I'm scared or intimidated or there's fear here. So I don't really love that line. I like the line of like, relationships take effort, just like anything else worth having. And I'm lucky enough to have a handful of people in my life that have relationships that I very much value and I look up to and are great role models when it comes to great, healthy relationships, power couple, or just great people, the great relationships, happy with each other. So I leverage them. And I remember before we got married, I put on Instagram and I was like, hey, would love your one piece, like, ask the world, what is your one piece of marriage advice? And I got
Huh.
hundreds of, it's funny, man. You ask somebody like what their
Everyone's got
goal
some.
is, nobody will say a word. And you
Yeah.
ask them marriage advice, they come flooding in. But I screenshotted all of them and I like compiled them and I like put them in a spreadsheet and stuff. And it was awesome to really see people who were married and I asked them like, and how long have you been married? And I got so much great advice of what was important and what wasn't. And 5 years ago, somebody thought this was important and it's not. And even some of the clients that I work with, I love because, when we focus on goals and we set things, it's not just business. We're very much probably more, when it comes to high performance, it's more of a personal coach and goals there too. But I love when people look back and, like what would be the advice you'd give yourself last year? And one of my clients just recently said this week. He was like, every argument that I've had with my wife wasn't worth it. And I highlighted that, underlined it. And yeah, there's some times where like you just want to, dig in but you just realize like at the end of the year, none of that was worth it. Like every single one of those, he's like, if I would go back, I just would have been like, either said sorry or like figured it out quicker or just like not gone down the road of trying to win that. So yeah, I think all along I knew that something like this existed, but this has been, it's not that we don't argue. I don't want to think people think that. It's not that we've never gotten in fights. It's not that we've never disagreed. It's not that we've never, we always see eye to eye, but this has been one of the easier relationships because I just feel like we both genuinely are happy individually, and because of that it's easier to be a great partner for the other person. And I don't look for her being like, hey, you need to make me happy today or you need to feel me, but But Brene Brown says a really good line that has been helpful for us that we use that I'll share with you guys is she goes like, people always think relationships are 50-50 and that's BS. And she goes, there are times when I'm 20 and Anne has my back by being 80 today. And there are times where vice versa. And sometimes even just voicing that of like, there's so much going on or my head is spinning or I'm overscheduled or whatever it is. And I'm like, babe, I feel like I'm a 20 today. And just me saying that, as opposed to being grouchy, being grumpy, coming in with a bad mood, me saying that, she will literally like
She
brighten
knows.
up. And
She knows.
she's like, I got you. I got you. I'm
Yeah.
80 today. I got you. And we've done that to each other so many times, as opposed to, why are you being such a pain in the ass today? Or why are you on my back about this? Or why are you asking, like that's what it could be. But just by saying I'm 20 or I'm, something today changes the whole dynamic of the day.
It's beautiful, man. Beautifully, beautifully, beautifully said. And I think you're spot on. And one thing I want to call out that you said that you're both happy individually. And I think that's so incredibly important, right? Like your cup has to be full before you can take care of someone else. And I think that's a point that we've heard over and over again, but just re-emphasizing that because it is so critical to any dynamic when it comes to a relationship. You cannot expect happiness from your partner. And and so that's awesome. I want to pivot us because I want to make sure that we hit on this. And I'm going to ask you a question that a lot of first time authors get. Um, you know, Uncomfortable either way. Why choosing easy is making your life hard. Brett, who gave you the right to speak on this topic?
Oh, so you're good. You're good. I like that. I feel like I've earned the right through the work that I've done, kind of like my body of work. And when I say my body of work, and the reason the whole book came about was every year I'll ask myself, if I only had one, it's kind of it's a weird question, but bear with me here because it really does work. But I'll ask myself, if I knew, I only had one more year to live, what would be my regret in each bucket? And my bucket, when I meant like health, wealth, family, relationships, whatever, trips, things, um, it puts in perspective what I need to prioritize this next year. And and for me, from a business standpoint, I was like, yeah, I could coach more people. Yeah, I want to speak on that stage and that event. But for me, it was the book. And now, granted, the book has taken me more than a year to get out, so it's actually been a year and a half goal. But that was the thing. It was like I know that I have the content for a book, and it wasn't like this was the first idea. I mean, Bishoy, I have a Google document that has March 2015, from my birthday, that I sat down and decided to write the first chapter of a book. Like that's how long I've been writing in this Google document. So the book was like almost written when we sat down. It was just jumbled in all of this stuff that we had to cut out and make it more streamlined. But every big moment of my life, and if we trace back like the story of Brett, there were all these forks in the road of choosing uncomfort to get something different. and and realizing that all of those moments, it's like I was just uncomfortable where I was, or I was uncomfortable with the situation at hand, or I was uncomfortable with the way I viewed money, or I was uncomfortable the way I was talking to myself, or I was uncomfortable with the way I would break the promises and commitments to myself every single day. Like that was where this all stemmed from. And I realized like how often we push things to tomorrow because it's just easier. But those easy decisions add up. And I know we want a life of easy, but all of those easy decisions end up with really, really hard circumstances for ourselves. So the whole book of this, it shares some personal stories. It also shares, I've been a coach for going on 10, 15 years, whether it was fitness or high performance. So I share some stories through clients of like their moments too. So I just feel like there are great examples in that book that will resonate with a lot of different people being like, whoa, I totally resonate with that. And seeing how somebody else got through it or the decision that they made, it'll highlight and put an underline on the decision that probably somebody already knows they need to make.
I think that's such an important formula when it comes to writing, these thought leadership pieces is not just giving your own advice, giving the advice of others, and allowing the reader to kind of seep in and understand and find, notions of relatability. Yeah, it's less so being talked at and,
Yes.
more so being talked with. And that's a big piece of it.
Yes. Yeah, this book is full with things that I did wrong. so so don't think that this is like, oh, Brett's perfect example of no. This is mistake after mistake of how I pulled myself out of some dumb dumb choices here.
Let me ask you, what has the book writing process taught you about you? I mean, I could speak to this obviously, so I know what it's like when you go through this, especially when you're talking about something so personal. I
Yeah.
remember when I wrote Break Barriers, my first book, the amount of wrestling I had to do with my editor around certain topics that we wanted to keep in, take out, and it was all personal. It wasn't,
Yeah.
so talk to me about that.
Yeah, there's definitely been some major points on this book. And the first one is the route that I took of the book of I said, again, this was one of my like kind of legacy pieces here of the first book I do is like I don't want I want, the editor's help and all this stuff, but like I want to write the book that I wanted to write. And if that means less money, if that means I had to pay more up front, like all of that, great. But I didn't want this book to be, 15 other people telling me the book that would sell the best. And all of a sudden I put this book out and I'm like, that's not the one I wanted to write. Because I've just been in the audience
Yeah.
of too many speakers where they're like, my first book, I did that, my second book, and the fifth book was the one I wrote that I really wanted to write. And I just wish I would have done that first. I'm like, I'm not going to waste 5 books doing that. So the first book, like I'm really proud of this book because it's the one that I wanted to write. The other piece that really surprised me is, first of all, if this is a writing a book is a massive lesson in delayed gratification because there are so many little milestones along the way that like you can just blow past and be like, man, the book's still not out. The book's still not out. And I probably, I'm usually not one to share before like it's ready, but I probably shared with too many people of like this book's coming out because I thought we were going to be done with it, and then all of a sudden you hit some changes, and but it's one of those things where it really is about one more step. Running a ultra marathon or tryout, whatever it is like it's like you can only focus on the couple steps ahead of you, right? Doing 29:0:29 where it's the middle of the night and you have a headlamp and you can't
Yeah.
see the top, you can't see the bottom, and it's like all I can really it was the
See is
beautiful
what's in front of you. Yeah.
the 2 steps in front of me is literally all you could focus on. It was a beautiful analogy and like the deepest pain that you could be in. That was awesome. The last point I'll say is how much when you're growing and you are putting yourself in situations where you constantly have to learn, you constantly have to evolve. What is interesting to me is it's been it's been 10 years since almost 10 is probably 8 years since I started, that document. It's been going on probably 14 months since I started like the actual process. And what's crazy about it is the book still rings true, but it's almost like I'm almost on to the next onto the next thing. And I've almost been like, shit, I want to put all this stuff into this book. And it's like, no, at some point you have to hit like period, end, enter, submit. But it's just interesting to me of like the things that I'm talking about. I'm almost already excited because so much has changed in my life. And I feel like I've evolved so much as a person that there's almost new content that I'm really excited to touch on.
Yeah, no, man, you hit on so many important points, and I want to call out one of them in particular. If you're listening to this, and I know there are a lot of people who are listening to this who have toyed around with the idea of potentially writing a book, the point you made about getting book number one right is so critical because that's gonna be the piece that that sticks with you forever, right? Like, you're right, you don't wanna go up to book 2, 3, 4, 5, and then be like, I finally got it." So, I would urge anyone who's, like, toying around with this idea. I know I've had a lot of people reach out to me being like, "Where do you get started? How do you do this? What do you need to think about?" I will say take your time, make sure you get book number 1 right because book number 1 is gonna be the ones forever tied to you, and your message. And that's really what's most important. So thanks for walking us through that. Brett, I could talk to you forever, man. I really could.
Yeah, this has
There's
been
so much
super fun.
I could dig into with you, and that I want to dig in with you, but I know we have limited time here. So I think as we round things out, um, the one thing that stands out to me and that is really evident to me, and this is a theme I've seen with a bunch of guests, but in particular within our conversation, as much as you've accomplished, I really truly feel like you're only getting started. I really feel like you're nowhere near, where your life's mission is gonna take you at this point. And I think that there's a special energy about that. And I think it might be what you do when it comes to, speaking and being in front of audiences. You kind of project this aura of, owning the end to your story, right? Like it doesn't you always have the ability to take the pen and write, the remaining chapters of the book. And I think that's a really, really incredible quality. And I want to get your thoughts on um, when you approach people and when you're speaking on these stages and you think about a lot of people who really think, their story's already been written. What's your guidance? How do you help, you know, spread that energy that you have to say, hey, you know, you're really only getting started, my friend.
First of all, thank you. I really appreciate that acknowledgement and you reflecting that in me. That means a lot. And I feel the same way. So it's nice to know that there's some of that coming off. I do. I feel like the more you step into alignment with, and everybody wants to focus on the big things. Like I talk about macro and micro, and like the macro of like the big splash moments of your life. Like, yeah, those are awesome and they'll give you confidence, but those are few and far between. And the only way that those big splash, moments really will give you lasting confidence is when you're focusing on the micro things that you do daily. Like the little decision here, is that still getting you to where you want to go? The time you wake up, or the decision to do something or to not do something. Like all those little micro moments make up more about confidence and more about your self-worth and self-confidence than the big, twice a year macro splashes into the deep end. So that's the first part. The second thing is, it's going to go back to the book, and I feel like I share a lot of that, these like little stories in there, but you can change whenever you want, but you have to be willing to admit that you are uncomfortable where you are. And you have to be willing to say, like, a lot of it is these moments of, I know I need change, but I don't know what it is. That's not a moment to sit still and think. That's the moment to keep going and go step by step until you figure it out. Using the headlamp example, take two more steps, and then all of a sudden, oh man, there's a checkpoint here. I didn't even see it. Great. Now I have a checkpoint. I have more data. I have more information. I'm 2/3 of the way up this mountain. And then you go back and all you can see is the 2 steps in front of you, and 2 steps and 2 steps. Oh, here's the little bridge. Okay, I know that we're probably only 2,000 feet now from the top of the mountain. It's these little moments that you have to do, but you only get them by going forward. You only get them by continuing to go forward. So for a lot of people, I just challenge them, don't get caught sitting still and thinking and confusing either doing research or sitting and thinking for the perfect plan as action, because it's not. They're not the same. Too many people confuse action with, oh, let me think of the best plan, or I admitted I want the change, so that's half the battle. No, like all of the battle is built in the action. So take the action and you said it, man. Pick up the pen. Pick up the pen. You have the pen. You can rewrite it at any point in time. Any point in time you want to change, but you also need to to admit that you probably need to unlearn more than you need to learn. And I'll end with this: is like, people think, oh, I need more skills. I need the new habits. I need the thing. No, what you probably need to do is unlearn the things that you've been taught by the people who don't have the life that you want. And that is really, to me, the most powerful thing that I talk about now is, if you can unlearn the money habits of somebody who've taught you, but like they don't actually have the wealth that you want. If you can unlearn the physical fitness habits or the health and nutrition habits that you've been taught by maybe mom, grandma, cousins, and you're like, wait a minute, they don't have the health that I want. You need to unlearn that before you can go create the new version of yourself. So I actually think that's what holds people back way more than like, I don't have the knowledge.
Brett, that is such a perfect way to end this, man. Thank you so much for bringing it home so perfectly for us. I mean, there's a lot to reflect on just in that, last minute. And I can't leave the audience with a stronger note myself. I think walking away from this podcast, be intentional, right? Action is everything. Do hard things. Uh, Neither you or me would be where we are if we didn't get comfortable being uncomfortable.
Yes.
And I think that's the perfect way to close this out. Brett, thank you so much for coming on, for opening up with us, for being vulnerable, for letting us in. I have no doubt, we'll be following along. Is there an official release date for the book right now?
It's vague. Spring of 2025. I am pushing like crazy. Trust me, everybody out there, I am doing everything in my power to get this in your hands as soon as possible, because I want it in my hands as soon as possible. So yeah, you'll know when it's out. Trust me.
All right. We will be following along. Thanks again. We'll definitely be bringing you on in the future, my man.
I appreciate it. I had a great time today. Thank you so much.
You got it. Thank you for listening today. If you enjoyed this episode of the Mile 40 podcast, go ahead, subscribe, leave a review, and share the word. Thank you for being a part of the Mile 40 family. And let's unite in showing the world that comebacks are always greater than setbacks.